Okay, I believe we're live. Beep, beep, boop, boop. Here we are. I've got a little bit to talk about tonight. So before I forget, if you want to help me out, if you want to help me out, download the Postmates app. Postmates was purchased by Uber Eats, so they've got all the same stuff. And use the promo code BITS to get 50% off of your first five orders of $50 or more. Now, I'm saying that, but all you really need to do is just download the app, put the promo code in, and just delete the app. I don't care. Just put that code in so I get credit for it. That's all I want you to do. That's all I've asked my family to do, so that's all I'll ask you to do. Thanks. And I opened my Good Pods app. Well, shit. This is great. I don't know how to use phones. So I opened my Good Pods app today. And I've been kind of trending on there a little bit, but now my podcast is the one that is featured on stand up. So when you see stand up in Good Pods, that's me. So I'm kind of proud of that. That's pretty cool. I really like that. The other thing is Spotify. So Spotify, let's all agree that Spotify has become a mega business that is so capitalistic that they are kicking comedians off of their platform so they don't have to pay them. I personally know two comedians that have been kicked off. So I am going to move my own listening away from Spotify to Tidal, which pays their artists a lot more and doesn't dick around with their money. And it's tough for me because I've got probably 100 different playlists on Spotify, and I love making playlists for my friends and stuff like that because I like music and I like getting my year in review. I love all that stuff, but I am going to stop giving Spotify money, and they will probably end up kicking me off the podcast, off the thing. They probably won't. They don't care about me, but they might. So I'm moving away from Spotify, and I don't care if I'm not gonna be mad at you if you keep Spotify, but I think there should be some awareness out there that that they are not only one of the lowest paying streaming services for artists, even though they're the biggest, but they are actually undercutting comedians by kicking them off. Just saying, giving them reasons like it looks like somebody was fraudulently downloading overnight or something like that. But anyway, a lot of comedians are getting kicked off. Big comedians, Gaffigan and stuff like that, they're getting albums pulled. So I would, if you can, find another streaming service. Anything but Spotify pays more, except for maybe Pandora. I think Pandora is still pretty low. So Tidal is a good deal. They've got a $10 thing subscription that's just like Tidal or just like Spotify, and it sounds better, and I like it. So that's I'm going to get off my soapbox now. I'll probably do a separate little episode of me bitching about Spotify, but let's stop this and get to my guest. So my guest tonight is a Bloomington, Indiana comic who's performed all over the Midwest and is featured on the album On Tour from Bloomington, which is on Tidal. I checked my Tidal, and all of Shanda's tracks are on there. So you can, if you move to Tidal, you can still listen to On Tour from Bloomington. And she was on the premiere show of Hunters on the Vice Network. She's performed at the Finger Lakes Comedy Festival, the Milwaukee Comedy Festival, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but I believe she may have been the pregnantest performer to ever take the stage of the prestigious Limestone Comedy Festival. I think she might have given birth the next week. Now, the cool thing is, and I want to put this graphic up so I don't forget, she is headlining the often talked about Comedy Attic in Bloomington for New Year's Eve. So she's doing I believe it's an 8 o'clock show and a 10:30 show. And the 10:30 show, you get champagne and all that kind of stuff. But totally stoked for her. And I believe she may be the only guest I've had on here that I actually performed on a real show with. So it's pretty cool. Let's bring her out now. It's Shanda Song. Shanda, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Scott?
Great. It's great to have you on, and I'm totally stoked about you headlining the Comedy Attic.
I'm going to start this episode by having a cough attack.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm just so excited. I can't breathe. Yes, I'm very excited about it. The Comedy Attic is my home. It's my home club. If I'm not in my house or at Kroger, I am at the Comedy Attic.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Jared has been, the owner there, has been very supportive of me for a very long time. So, yeah, it's I'm excited that he's seen me improve to the point that he feels like I can headline a New Year's Eve show. So
that's great. And the Comedy Attic has come up so many times. And people I've talked to, Todd Glass is one of my favorite guests I've had on.
Yeah.
And we talked probably for a third of the episode about the Comedy Attic. And it's the place where people, first of all, big comics go there to work out their stuff.
Yeah.
And they have incubated some really great comics themselves, such as yourself, because Jared is a true comedy fan, along with being a comedy club owner. And that's kind of rare these days.
Yeah. It's great because it's such an incubator is a great word for it, where right there is where it's warm, it's cozy, it's an accepting area. The audiences are smart and well behaved. It's the perfect place to test out new material, and it's the perfect place to record albums. I've watched so many album recordings in that club, and so many comics from all over the country come to Bloomington to record at the Comedy Attic because it is just such a good room and good audiences. And I feel very fortunate to be living in a small town in Southern Indiana, but then have this seat of comedy right here. And I can run down the street and see amazing people. And I think it's been extremely helpful to me in my comedy, and not something that I would have had if I lived other places,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely the gold standard of comedy clubs, and I got to get Jared on the show sometime since I've talked about him so much. But that'll be another show. So let's back up a little bit, because I did mention that you were super pregnant. I guess you can't be any more pregnant than you already are, but you were due very soon.
Yes.
When you did the Limestone Festival. I think that was the first time in 2018. Is that right?
Yes, so I started comedy when my oldest son was a year old, and I have since had 2 kids. And my second kid my son was born in 2016, and there's a contest at the Comedy Attic every summer. And I was in that contest, and I was progressing, as was my pregnancy. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do here? And the show for the semifinals was Wednesday night. And I did the show, and my water broke Thursday morning. And he was born on Thursday. And I had been eliminated. So the audience knew. They were like, this lady is not going to be around next week. Let's not even put her through. And so I'd been eliminated. But typically, if someone's eliminated in the semifinals, which is what that was, Jared will say, why don't you come back and do a guest set on the finals? Because they're down to just 3 comics to fill time. And I had to call him a couple days later and be like, I'm not making that show. I'm like, I had a baby several days ago. There's no way I can be in public right now. And so I did that. And then in 2018 was the year that I made it into Limestone. And I knew that it was going to be very close. And I went, so the festival was on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I went to my doctor on Thursday, and I was like, do I have 3 days? And she was like, I think so, and she was actually in the audience for the one of the biggest shows I had that was at the theater downtown.
Uh-huh.
My my obstetrician was in the audience, which was so funny. I didn't know at the time. She came up to me after. I was like, "I would have shouted you out on stage."
Yeah.
But, my due date was 4 days after Limestone, and
Mhm.
she was late by, like, 10 days, so I was fine.
Yeah.
But that's another thing to say about Jared and Madelano Martin, who also runs Limestone, because I got in and they were like, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes." And that was the end of it. There was no
Mhm.
like questioning, and they just knew like if it came to me saying, "I'm in labor right now, I can't do it," they would figure it out. And
Mhm.
there that's something to say because
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
would
it
have been
really
so
is.
easy to be like, "Yeah, we'll catch her next year. She seems a
Mhm.
little busy," but they left that decision to me and believed me when I said I could do it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that's the kind of community that Bloomington has. All of my other fellow Bloomingtonian comics, our scene is so tight and we're all friends, that if something would have happened, they would have said, "Absolutely, I'll step up and help you
Mhm.
out." If my water would have broken on stage, somebody would have taken me to the hospital in a
Yeah.
second. Like,
Yeah.
they not that I guess I don't know. I don't know other scenes. Do they leave you in leave you on stage to give birth to a baby? I'm just saying we're a very supportive scene, and I'm thankful for it all the time.
There are probably some scenes that would just leave you sit there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny about because you mentioned your youngest was 3 years old before we started,
Yeah.
and my grandson's 3 years old, and it's amazing what they've done with the whole giving birth thing now. Because we flew out because my daughter lives in the DC area. We flew out for the birth, and she was not feeling like she was gonna give birth in that week that we were out there. So she went
Yeah.
to her doctor, and her doctor said, "Well, when do you want to have the baby?" And brought her in on Sunday and induced her, and then there's the baby. So it's
Yeah.
changed quite a bit because my wife was, I think she was about 10 days overdue on my daughter.
Yeah.
And I remember I worked at Wendy's at the time. I was a manager at Wendy's, and the I took the week off after she was supposed to give birth, so she actually went beyond that, and I was going back to work on Monday, and then she, went into labor on Saturday, so they
Yeah.
gave me another week off. It was a very nice franchise of Wendy's, so they were
Yeah,
good to
that's
me, but
great.
yeah.
Yeah,
Eh
that was kind of our situation. My husband was off and then he went back to work because she was 10 days overdue, and then at 14 they're like, "We're done.
Yeah,
You get in here and we're inducing you."
yeah,
And in the 80s when I was born, my mom said I was 3 weeks overdue. And I'm
yeah,
like, "On
yeah,
what planet?"
yeah,
Like,
that's
what?
nuts.
They induced her and it didn't work and they sent her home for another week. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Nope." So the 80s were the dark ages, I think. I
Yeah.
feel every time. I mean, I have never respected my mother more than when she told me that as I'm sitting there overdue. I was like, "This is miserable." She's like, "You don't even know.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah,
This
that's
is
nuts.
payback."
So one of the things that is kind of unusual about you is first of all, people with kids tend not to get into comedy. I did that. My kids were grown by the time I started, and so you had a 1 year old when you started. What
Yeah.
was it that compelled you to start doing stand up comedy when you've got a 1 year old at home?
Um, Mania? I don't know. I have I've always been a little bit of a pile my plate too high kind of person. I
Uh-huh.
Even when I was younger, I was in a dozen extracurriculars. Like, I
Mhm.
just wanted to do a little bit of everything all the time and be very busy all of the time. I
Mhm.
kind of thrive in that. And if I don't have anything to do, I just go a little crazy a little bit.
Uh-huh.
But I did musical theater all through school. I did a little bit of group improv with some of my high school friends. We did a couple shows where we just ripped off Whose Line Is It Anyway games.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I had an interest in comedy, and then what did it was that, I was working, and one of the board members of my place of work came in, and she had started comedy, and I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
that's really interesting," because I went to the Comedy Attic all the time. I loved going there. I loved watching comedy, and there was a little back of my mind like, this would be fun to do, but I also want to be very prepared all the time. And
yeah.
so she mentioned to me that the way she got into it was by taking an extended learning class through Ivy Tech, a
Oh,
stand-up comedy class. And I said, "Oh, that's something to try. Why not?" And
mhm,
I was about to turn um I had just turned 29, and I was like, "Last year of my 20s, let's do something." And so I
yeah.
signed up for this class and I took it, and you wrote a minute of material every week and then performed it in front of your class and got feedback, and then by the end of it you've got 5 minutes, and they ended the class by doing a show at the Comedy Attic.
Mhm,
And that was it. Like, I did that show, it went well,
mhm,
um, and, well enough for me to be buoyed into continuing, and
mhm.
so that's what happened. And the first open mic I ever went to, the next time I got on stage was at a coffee shop, and I brought my son. It
Yeah.
was like, I just was like, "Okay, this is the thing that," and I don't know, I was like, "Well, it's at a coffee shop. It's at like 7 PM. I'll bring my friend." My husband was working late, so I'm like, "My friend will come with me. She'll hold the baby while I go up on stage. It's just 5 minutes, whatever." I brought him to the coffee shop. It's insane to me that that I did that. No way. And but I did, and my friend had to take him outside was when I was on stage because he was like not into
Mama,
being able to hear
mama. Yeah.
me and see me and be away from me. So she took him, stood outside. I did my crummy 5 minutes, got off stage, and that was it. And I've done other there have been nights that I really like. I was getting ready for a show and I really needed to do the open mic at the Comedy Attic, but my husband was working late, and I
Mhm.
have driven to the Comedy Attic, put a movie on in my minivan, had one of my fellow comics come downstairs, sit in my minivan with my kids while I went stairs, did my set, and then came back in, got in my van, and went home. And I've done
Wow,
that. I've done that probably 3 times.
that
And
is commitment.
I don't know if it's good parenting, but it is
Eh,
commitment.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't
As
know.
long as the kids aren't in danger, they should
Yeah.
experience lots of things. So,
Yeah,
that's
they're
what I did with
safe,
mine.
and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I've really kind of just been like, if this is something I wanna do, I'm gonna figure out how to make it work,
Mhm.
and that's kind of the only thing I can say about why I didn't say, "Well, I'll wait till they're teenagers," or whatever. I wanna do this, I feel inspired to do this, and I'm gonna make it
Mhm.
work. And
Mhm.
fortunately, I have a husband who is 100% on board. He's
Yeah,
like he's
that
like, "Yeah,
helps.
go," drive, especially those first years where I'm driving out of town to do 3 minutes for no
Mhm.
money and then driving back. It's a little better now that I'm getting paid, and
Yeah.
but, like, at any point, he could have been like, "Can you not?" And,
Yeah.
that would have been reasonable of him, but
Right.
he never did, and is very supportive, which is key. I like, without him being an on-board partner in this, I would
Mhm.
never be able to do it, so,
Mhm. Are
yeah.
you able to do comedy when he's there in the audience?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. It
and I do
doesn't
have I have several jokes about him, and
Mhm. Yeah, you do.
any
Yeah.
joke that I have about him, I run by him
Mhm.
and tell him, and yeah, he's never once told me not to do a joke.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
I actually made I kinda drugged my wife into a lot of the first open mics that I did, and the only reason is I just never wanted to be the worst one, and
yeah,
so I'd only ask one question after the show, and was I the worst?
yeah.
And then, you know, after enough of not being the worst and her saying, "You were actually pretty good tonight." Then after that, I was like, "Okay, you don't have to come. You can come
Yeah.
if you want, but you don't have to come."
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good to get that spousal commitment, and, it's we didn't have kids at home when I did it, but still, going to an open mic, I think you know where the Drop Comedy Club is in South Bend,
Yeah.
and you know what walks in there sometimes. I've had a guy come in and take a drink of my beer and run out before,
Oh my
and
gosh.
it's a weird. Well, it's not there anymore. It's actually in a hotel downtown, but where it was you know. My wife would drive separate and I'd walk her out to the car and make sure she was okay. But yeah, it is a bit of a commitment. But for your husband to not only support you, but also juggle three kids while you're
Yeah.
going out and doing it, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, he's been great for it, and he doesn't get to see me very often,
Hmm.
obviously, and
Yeah.
but when he does, he's he's been good with the feedback, and I'll always go to him when I'm working something out and kind of talk at him, and he's
Hmm.
like, "Well, it sounds like you know where you're going with
Right.
this,"
Right.
or, whatever. So he's good at kinda knowing how to direct me
Yeah.
or, or not, or just sit there and absorb and let me bounce it off
Yeah.
of him or whatever, and,
Well, and I think a good
yeah.
spouse really wants you to succeed and not look stupid. So
Yeah, that's true.
they're pretty honest because I bounce stuff off my wife and she's like, "No way,"
Yeah.
and other stuff she's like, "Yeah, that's all right, that's all right." So yeah, I feel like that having having that type of support system is really great when you are in a partnership like that and raising kids especially. That's
Yeah.
big.
I knew
Now
I
do
was
you
doing alright when he started inviting his friends to my shows.
Mhm.
Like, "Okay, so now he's not embarrassed by me."
Yeah.
Like, I've
Yeah.
gotten good enough. He's okay inviting other people to
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's think about if you were say you were somewhere else besides Bloomington. Say you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they don't have a comedy club or they don't have anything that's like a comedy attic. Would do you think you would have still stuck with it, or do you think the comedy attic was something that kept you going?
That's difficult to say because I'm a little bullheaded in that way that
Hmm.
as long as I was somewhere where I was getting an occasional good show, I may have continued to hammer it out,
Hmm.
but I don't know because the support of the attic and being able to do shows there and just watch a lot of comedy helped
Hmm.
me improve. So I think that without it, I definitely would not have improved as
Hmm.
quickly as I have. And obviously I wouldn't have had the opportunities, but whether or not it would have prevented me from continuing at all, it's hard to say.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'm pretty bullheaded, so maybe I would have just still done it.
Cool.
But,
Cool.
yeah, definitely
Now,
wouldn't have had so many awesome experiences.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And thinking about those first sets that you did and how you are now, how much like the person that was on stage when you first started are you now?
Pretty pretty similar, I think. I think that what I've tried to come away from is doing only parenting jokes
Mhm.
and being a mom jokes, and there is value in that and there is an audience for that for sure. I've had many audience members kind of come up and tell me like, "Oh, I'm a mom. I
Mhm.
remember all that stuff," especially when I was pregnant and I was just like, "I don't like being pregnant. Everybody
Mhm.
has to say that it's a miracle and you love it, but I'm here to tell you that this sucks." and and I got to the point where most of my material was mom related, kid related, parenting related, and I didn't want that to be the case. I didn't want to have to lean on that.
Mhm.
Want I don't want my kids to feel like I've used them as a prop, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and as they get older, and so that has changed a little bit. I've tried to diversify the types of jokes that I tell, but as far as style, I I was always a little I feel like I'm a little all over the place as far as I'll do some shorter, quicker joke and then a little
Mhm.
bit more story based and
Mhm.
then a little bit more absurdist, but it's hard to reflect on your own comedy and define yourself. That's why I hate
Yeah.
writing bios.
Yeah, no doubt.
But yeah, I think I'm definitely more comfortable on stage and a little more relaxed in myself and less putting on kind of a caricature of myself just out
Mhm,
of nervousness.
mhm.
But I will say I haven't gone back and watched any year 1 or 2 videos in a very long time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
who knows? Maybe I would feel differently if I did that.
yeah, and there's no reason to do that.
No.
With all that you had, that you got to see at the Comedy Attic, and we all have our favorite famous comics, but did any comedians come through that maybe weren't quite as, a household name that came through and really inspired you to be a better comedian?
Man, many. And the first names that come to mind are Beth Stelling. I mean,
Mhm,
she's just unbelievable. And Tom Takar, who is from Bloomington, but
mhm.
also like has made me laugh until I cried almost every time I've seen him.
Yeah,
And you know, there have been just I don't think I've seen a bad show because even
yeah.
shows that didn't go as well, like they're there's something to them, they're
Mhm,
where they are for a reason. And even people who I'm like, well, this isn't really my style,
mhm.
I can get something from watching them. But yeah, Beth Stelling was one of the ones that I watched right at the beginning, and I was like, I mean, she's it.
Mhm.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, there have been a lot of great ones that I've seen, and even just watching some of my peers and people coming into feature who are just
Mhm.
killers.
Mhm.
And I'm like, how are you featuring right now? You should be Caitlin Palufo. The first time I
Mhm.
saw her, and I think she was at the Limestone when I was really pregnant, and
Uh-huh.
she just blew everybody away. And she has headlined since then, but
Yeah.
I mean, she's so funny. That's one of the great things about watching shows because we get these incredible features too.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
who are smart and hungry and
Mhm.
just so good.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to a few comics that regularly headline, and they think a feature should know their place. They should only take it up to a certain level, and then other comics I talk to want them to try to be funnier than them and really bring it. And
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. I think the headliners that really want you to bring it were probably bringing it when they were featuring too.
Yeah. Anybody who's gonna tell a comic that goes before them, like, pull back a little bit, like,
Yeah.
that comes from either a huge ego or, like, some crippling self-esteem issues.
Yeah,
Like,
no doubt,
I
no
can't
doubt.
yeah. Like, for New Year's when I'm there, um, I was choosing who was gonna be on the show with me, and I picked, David Brooks from Indianapolis, who kills every time I see him,
Mhm.
and my friend Stephanie Lockbeeler, who just crushes all the time. And I'm like, as I asked them, I was like, "Oh shit, am I gonna bury myself?"
Yeah.
Like, there's a chance that I just got myself in some trouble. And so it's making me a little hungrier, like
Yeah.
I need to bring myself up to make sure that I am at my best.
Uh-huh.
And then this show is going to be amazing, beginning to end, if that's the
Right.
case. Like, I'm not going to pick somebody because I think that I'm going to be able to dunk on them. Like, that's
Yeah.
sad. Yeah.
I like that. I like that analogy. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So, I I don't wanna dig. I mean, people that go to the show are gonna see it, but I don't wanna dig into your set, so much that you give any of it away, but, you know, the headlining set, that set for a special night like New Year's Eve, I know you've probably been obsessing about it and all that kind of stuff. So how much effort and time do you think has gone into the set that you are about to perform in about 30 days?
Um, I would say that some of the jokes, I would say the oldest joke that I have in there is probably 3 years,
Mhm.
3.5 years, and so those are that would be when I started on some of these things, and there's a bunch of stuff that up to that point I've cut. I'm no longer interested in doing, things about pregnancy or parenting or, things like that that I've just moved beyond, even though I
Mhm.
like some of those jokes, and
Mhm.
I have thought about maybe bringing some of them back for this, but yeah, so that's that's about the age of the majority of this stuff, and I, obviously took some time off during the pandemic when everything was closed. The
Yeah.
Comedy Attic closed back or opened back up in June, and I was
Mhm.
there, June of 2020. So it was just a few months, and I did do a few
Yeah.
Zoom shows. I don't know why, because
Yeah.
it was I was an act
I
of
did too.
desperation. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's not
it
good.
didn't feel great, no,
Yeah.
but yeah, the majority, some of the jokes are just a few months old. For better or for worse, I write a lot, and I
Mhm.
turn over material maybe too quickly.
Mhm.
Um, but I have to feel good about it. I have to
Mhm.
feel excited about it, and I get bored with my own stuff a little faster than maybe would be best for me.
Mhm.
But it does mean that I had a lot of material to pick from for this, and I'm still shuffling and figuring out what feels best and what fits best with all the rest of it. So, I don't know. I have my master list, and then who knows where I'll land in the
Mhm.
next couple weeks as I figure out what I wanna cut or keep.
Yeah, yeah. What's your worst experience as far as stand-up's concerned?
I'm very fortunate that I haven't had a lot of really bad experiences. I've
Uh-huh.
had d do you mean more like bombing related?
It could be anything. Audience member throws a glass at you, or the booker turns out to be a jerk, or whatever. Any of
I've
those types of things.
Yeah, I haven't had anything crazy like that in an audience, mostly because, well, that would never happen to the Comedy Attic for one, and I just it's not really how I've had some hecklers, but
Mhm.
not really anything terrible. All the bookers that I've worked with have been fine. Some of them have been great, and
Mhm.
I do, the worst thing I can think of, and, is the very first joke I wrote that was like, "Oh, this is a closer," was this joke that is about it's me saying, so other parents, sometimes I can tell which kid is their favorite, and I like to go on Facebook and try to figure out which kid is their favorite by photos they post. And some
Mhm.
people are subtle about it and have a certain 50 pictures of this one, 60 pictures of that one, and that's not too obvious. But one person is so obvious about it. She has a whole album that's called My Family, and it's all of her kids and her husband. And then she has a separate photo album called My Angel, and it's only pictures of that kid. And I know that kid died a year ago, but that's still just
Oh.
way too obvious. And
Oh.
it I never felt super great about it when I wrote it. I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, "Is this too much?" And he was like, "No, you have to say that."
Yeah.
And then I did, and it went so well, and I'm like, "Well, now I have a closer." And so I did it for
Uh-huh.
probably a year and a half, and then I did a show. So my dad and I produce shows at, bars and wineries up in my hometown together
Mm.
sometimes. He's a
Mhm.
drummer, so he has equipment, so he brings the
Mhm.
equipment and I bring the comics. And, I did it there, and then I realized that my dad's cousin was in the audience, and she had lost a grandchild recently,
Oh,
and I
man.
I had just a pit in my stomach, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Alright, this joke is no longer who I am," and I dropped it,
Uh-huh.
which was hard because it was my closer, and so
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
"I gotta get some now I have to write something else," and so that just feeling so horrible about that, and I started the joke and then I realized she was there and I was like, "I can't stop now,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just kept on with it. So that stands out in my mind as a point that I was like, "Okay, do I do I hold on to this joke because it does well, or do I let it go because it doesn't feel good to me anymore? And
Mhm.
so I let it go. And I've had some comics be like, "Man, why'd you get rid of that?" Because you spend 5 minutes talking about how you're a mom and your kids, and then you drop this curveball on people, and I'm like, I get it, but structurally, it's good, and I was able to kind of be like, okay, what works with it, and can I write something that I feel good about in this
Uh-huh.
structure,
Yeah.
which I have done. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a perfect misdirect. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's great. Thinking about your, where was I going? I'm losing myself. Think about where you, are going as far as this headlining thing. Do you do you feel like you want to put more effort into stand-up comedy now, and that you want to maybe travel more or make it more of your life, or do you feel like that you just want to kind of stick around in your region and keep it up that way?
that's the question.
Yeah.
That's the question I have every day. Like, what do I aspire to, and
Hmm.
should I be aspiring to that? And so I I book I book as far as I can go and be back for my kids for
Hmm.
the next school day.
Hmm.
I wedge whatever I can within this insane schedule that my husband and I have. He works a lot, and my kids are in sports and things like that. And so I do as much as I can within that framework. And we have gotten to the point where I've done some things that are out of town. Like we went to Nashville and we took the whole family, and I did shows
Hmm.
at night, and we got a hotel and did family stuff during the day. And I loved that. And that
Hmm.
is what I would love to continue to do within the parameters of
Yeah.
our crazy life. Um, so of course I feel like this is a step, and so I want to immediately look, what's the next step and
Hmm.
where do I go from here? But I also have to take a second and be like, this is great where I am.
Hmm.
So appreciate this spot, and then leave yourself open to any future opportunities, and just keep trying to improve.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there. But
Hmm.
I'm not really in a position where I can say I'm moving to New York and that's the
Hmm.
next step for me, or Chicago or anywhere. I'm here. My kids are going to school here. This is where I am. And I'm fortunate that Bloomington's about 4 hours from several major cities.
Yeah.
And so there's a possibility that I'll be able to continue to expand and things as we go. But it's really hard to make make a goal like that, beyond
Hmm.
what I've already achieved. So I want to just sort of sit here and appreciate where I'm at. And then
Hmm.
I do have some other things booked in January already that I'm excited about. And so I feel like I've leveled up a little bit, and that's great, but I don't want to get caught up in what's next too
Right,
much.
right. That's good, that's good.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you write a lot. Do you have, like, a schedule that you write, or does it just all come to you and you stay up late writing sometimes?
I am wildly wedging writing in every second of my,
Okay.
like, anytime a thought enters my brain, I've got to put it somewhere. And so that means
Mhm,
I've got notes in my note app. I have voice
mhm,
messages in my voice app. I
mhm.
have 3, 4 notebooks. It's just everywhere, manic craziness. And if I get a second, like, that's where I'll put premises or just any moment. But as far as sitting down and trying to flesh something out, I do try to make time for that. I
Mhm.
can't always do that. And then sometimes you sit down, you're like, I'm going to write for half an hour right now. And then nothing comes.
Yeah.
So it's really just as the mood strikes me, and as I have a moment to scribble something while I'm sitting in the pickup line, or late at night, I wake up and write some stuff down, or
Uh-huh.
whatever. It's just wherever I can fit it in.
And having all the mom material and deciding that you don't wanna be defined by the mom thing, even though that's part of you, how did you pivot and be able to come up with other material that was actually good, because it feels to me like you're almost going back into the first stages of writing jokes when you first started, when you decide, okay, I want to insert this part of my life into my act
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, that was I was fortunate in that I had already been doing it for a few years, and so I knew what my writing process was and the framework that I kind of work in, like how to structure a joke and just simple stuff like that. But then when I decided, okay, this is a huge part of me, and it's hard for me to not just talk about my kids all the time because I'm a
Hmm.
stay-at-home parent and they are what I think about 90% of the
Yeah.
day. And so to try to force myself to look elsewhere, I'm like, okay, let's talk about my marriage a little bit. Let's talk about my husband a little bit. Let's talk about um, who I am and what I was like growing up and what the follies of that and things that people can relate to or not in that. And so those are the kind of places that I initially looked. And I will say, so during the pandemic, Mike Birbiglia, who I love,
Hmm.
started a podcast, Working It Out,
Hmm.
where he was just on talking, working out bits with comics.
Hmm.
I believe he's still putting out some new episodes, but a little less frequently. But
Hmm.
I got so into that and his process. And one of the things that he said that resonated with me was like, let's take the worst thing that's ever happened to you and write
Hmm.
about that,
Yeah.
and find comedy in things that aren't funny initially.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I took that to heart and started looking back. And I almost drowned when I was 6. And it
Hmm.
was a pretty big event in my life, obviously, and I'm like, "Okay, this is a thing that is on its face not funny at all.
Uh-huh.
So, where am I gonna find funny in that?" And it took me a while, it took me several weeks of me kinda working through different parts of how it happened and my parents' reaction and how it's affected me in my life, and I wrote for the finals of the comedy festival in 2020, I wrote 10 brand new minutes all about that.
Hmm.
And the whole thing was just, here's this horrible thing that happened to me. I'm going to spend 10 minutes trying to make you think it's funny.
Uh-huh.
And that has been whittled down to a 7 minute bit, 6 7
Mhm.
minute bit, and where I rage about Oreos, which I will be doing at the and that was a huge exercise for me to be like, okay, I'm gonna take this big thing and I'm gonna figure out where my angles are, and then I'm gonna beat it down, whittle it down, mold it, move it, turn it around. And I worked on that for a while, and it was really fun for me to be like, this is what I'm focusing on. So
Mhm.
that was huge to kind of take that tack of being like, what's not funny, and let's
Mhm.
let's go there.
And it's really a good thing that you're defining yourself as a whole person and not just
Yeah,
the you could almost get to be a caricature of a mom. You could be, like a
yeah.
Roseanne Barr or something like that if you do it long enough and that's all your material. So that's really good. I was going to ask you, your boys are old enough now that they probably know that mom does some stand up. What do they think of it?
They well, my oldest is 8, so he is right there hanging out in between. This is just a lame thing that my mom does and talks
Uh-huh.
about, so I'm not especially interested in it, but then
Mhm.
also I wanna know more about it. So he will ask me how shows go and ask me, he wants to know who did the worst. He's
Yeah.
like, "Who what was a bad joke? Tell me one of the ones that was really bad. I wanna know."
Yeah.
Which is very funny, but yeah, and they have been to the Comedy Attic. So, Greg Warren does this thing once a year. He does a show for kids,
Yeah.
and it's so fun, and I took my son to that, and he loved being there. He loved watching the comedy and stuff, and, he's a funny kid, and I've asked him about jokes before. I'm like, "Do you think this part is funny, or is it funnier if I say this?"
Mhm.
And, whether or not I listen to him is something else. My target audience is not 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
But but yeah, and then my 5-year-old, gets that I'll say, "I have a show, and I'll be back after you're in
Mhm.
bed, and I'll come in." And so he knows that, but I don't think he fully understands any more than that. We did go to my dad's house, and we were out in the garage, and I was like, "Oh," and he saw the door up in the top of the garage, the roof, and
Mhm.
he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, that's Papa's attic." And he goes, "Oh, Papa, I didn't know you had a comedy attic."
Aw.
It was the cutest, and I'm like, "Yep,
Aw.
that's it. That's where I hang out. I climb climb up one of those ladders and hang out with the Christmas decorations."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like to ask everybody is, what do you know now about stand-up comedy that you wish you would have known when you started?
So, I think that my answer to that is going to sound, arrogant, and it's gonna be nothing. It's gonna be that I think everything I learned in my own time in the order that I needed to learn it in,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I'm still that way.
Mhm.
I wouldn't give myself any cheat codes now if I could, because
Mhm.
I'm in process. I'm always in process. I'm
Mhm.
always thinking about how I can get better, how I can change the way I do things a little bit, and whether or not that's gonna work for me, and if I were to go back, I wouldn't want to change anything, even just to say, like, "You're not as good as you think you
Yeah.
are." That
Yeah.
let that joke go.
Uh-huh.
That one that you want to work so bad,
Uh-huh.
just let it go. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even do that because I needed to learn that when I learned it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that yeah. I'm not telling that lady anything.
Yeah.
She can figure it out on her own.
And that's one advantage of starting when you're an adult, because let's
Yeah.
face it, when you're 18 or 20 and starting, you 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 don't have the life experience, and you've got such a huge ego. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
how I was when I was young. If I would have started comedy when I was young, I would have been just insufferable. I would have been
Yeah.
just, just a total jerk. And but at the age we're at, it, you can push the ego aside, and you could be a little bit more of a realist. So that's one advantage we have, I
Yeah.
think.
I think, I I've considered doing improv in college and other things, and I thought, and I'm like, "Man, how great would it have been for me to get that extra time?" I should
Mhm.
have done that. I should have believed in myself a little bit more. I should have not been afraid of what that meant. I was trying to be so practical in college, like, "Well, this isn't gonna serve me in developing a career."
Mhm.
Like, what? I what
Yeah.
am I doing now? I had I still so, why didn't I just do the thing that felt like it was gonna be fun? And
Mhm.
but then also I'm like, I landed where I am when I did, and it has worked out so well for me that I think if I would have started earlier, I would have had so many years of just being so bad and
Yeah.
so insufferable and so
Mhm.
miserable because of it
Mhm.
that I'm glad I got to where I was, and, like, I was established of I've got a family, I had a job at the time, I've experienced rejection in many different forms
Yeah.
already,
Yeah.
so things were able to roll off my back that I know would have deeply bothered me at 18 or 19,
Yeah,
and
no
I
doubt.
would have really had a hard time with, but now it's like, I can't comedy drama can't come home with me, I've got
No.
too much to
Yeah.
do. And so I think that was helpful, but yeah, part of me will always be like, "Well, what if I'd have started, back then instead of wasting all that time in college trying to be a journalist?" Journalism?
Yeah.
What is that even that
Yeah.
doesn't even exist anymore. What was I doing?
Oh, that's great. Um, who what was the best advice you got when you were coming up doing comedy?
I remember very specifically, I was talking to my friend Stephanie Lockbeeler, who is gonna be
Mhm.
hosting for me on Christmas Eve, who was supportive of me from day one. Like,
Mhm.
I had seen her before, she saw me get up on stage one of the first times, and she came up to me and was like, "You gotta keep doing it.
Mhm.
And that was huge for me. But then she told me I was sort of languishing. I said, I've been doing the mic a bunch. I want to kind of become a regular. I don't know what I need to do. And she said, you need to ask.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? And she's like, send an email and say, I want to do this and ask. And that
Mhm.
would have never occurred to me to
Mhm.
just ask for what you want. And if they say no, they say no. If they say you need more time, they say you need more time. But standing here, waving your arms, like, look at me, notice me, just hand me things is a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was huge. I remember exactly where we were and we had that conversation. And she was like, send an email. I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, right." And then I did, and I was hosting the open mic, like, 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what a
Yeah.
yeah, so just ask. I mean, that's be cool, don't be a jerk to people, and make yourself available, and try to improve, keep your head down, and then ask for what you want.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. Can you tell me a little bit about the podcast?
Yeah, so so my best friend since we were 9 years old, we grew up right next door to each other, and we've been best friends all the way since, living completely separate lives. Like, I came to go to college in Bloomington, she became a flight attendant, moved to Denver, lived out there. Now she has an alpaca farm in Ohio,
Wow.
and I'm here. I played roller derby, I did comedy, I did like, we lived these just insanely different lives, but we
Mhm.
always have stayed close, and it was mostly just calling each other and being like, "Man, I learned about this thing," or "I read about this thing, let me tell you about it," and that's just always kind of been our relationship. And I was like, I would like to do a podcast. And my first thought was with her because we're
Mhm.
practically sisters. And I was like, let's just do what we always do and just talk to each other about stuff. And
Mhm.
so that's what we've been doing. We've been doing it since April. We have a different theme every week, and we each have a topic, and we take turns telling each other about it. And it's been really fun. And luckily, as I mentioned it to her, I was like, how would you feel about doing this? She was like, this is very well timed because my husband Tyler just decided he wanted to get into audio and video editing.
Oh, cool.
He's a man of many hobbies, and
Yeah.
it was woodworking before this, and now he was like, "Yeah, I'll produce the show. I'll do it." So he does all the editing and posts it and just does everything.
Yeah,
We
that's
just
great.
show up and talk, and so yeah, it's been really fun to do.
Yeah, and if you know what it takes to edit a podcast and do all the stuff, it's a lot, and I
Yeah,
still haven't farmed mine out, and I really need to, but
yeah,
I it's still my baby, and also I don't like spending money on
yeah,
something that's just a money suck anyway, so, why
yeah.
so I'll just keep doing it, I think.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day that he's like, "I cannot listen to you guys talk
Yeah.
for hours every week while I edit this thing. I can't do it." I hate both of you now. And so when that happens, we'll figure out something else.
Oh man, well, it's been great having you on. And folks, just go to thecomedyaddict.com and click on the event for New Year's Eve. If you're a B-Towner or somebody in the area, I mean, you could live all the way to Nashville, Indiana, and still hit the Comedy Addict.
Mhm.
And the 8 o'clock show and 10:30 show, and the podcast
It's
is on
Passing
all.
Notes with Ashley and Shanda, and I feel like that was see, this is how bad I am that I didn't even say the name of it when I was talking about it.
Well,
So
the
I
funny
should
thing is
learn from you.
yeah, well, I looked up the podcast and I knew the name and I forgot it right when I asked you about it. So that's age.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And folks, go out and see her. I don't think I mentioned this at the top, but I actually performed with Shanda at in Mishawaka at the Midway Tavern on the
Yeah.
show that John Hancock was doing. So I was appreciative of that, and that you're the only one I've interviewed that I've been on a real show with. I've had a couple of
Yeah?
them be at the same open mic as me, but that that you're the only one that's done a real show.
Alright, well, we're old friends.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being on, and I wish you the best of luck.
Alright, thanks, Scott, thanks for